Welcome to RECO12. I'm Justin, your host and a grateful child of an all-powerful, all-loving God and a recovering addict. I'm a multidisciplinary addict, and I'm grateful to be here. RECO12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers represent various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, reflecting the richness of our shared experiences. Join us in this journey of recovery and unity. Today's speaker for the 221st meeting is Joan, who is a first-time RECO12 speaker coming to us from a new to RECO12 fellowship, and super excited about this, Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous. And I'm excited to hear her share on her experience as a pioneering member of this fellowship and the unique definition of the drug and of sobriety in ABA. We will get to her talk in the Q&A afterwards in just a minute. First, for a little bit of business. RECO12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, or just hang out and learn and grow with us, you can check out the other podcasts. I'll put them in the chat here. We've got Noodle It Out with Nikki M, which is a deep dive into solutions to everyday questions in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We've got the Big Book Roundtable, which is a cover to cover basically walkthrough of the Big Book with 3 panelists who really know their stuff. And we've got RECO12 shares, which is like an open share. Anytime you want to call and record a share, got a link to do that. And I'll post those things in the chat and in the show notes of the podcast for anybody interested. Each of these release weekly. And grateful to have those out there. To learn more about each of these podcasts, check out the show notes. You can go to RECO12.com. That's RECO12.com, and join in our communities. Check out the chat and show notes to get that information. RECO12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Thank you all who have donated recently and in the past. You really are making a difference. If you would also like to join and support the RECO12 and become a spearhead, please visit RECO12.com/support for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support makes a difference in sharing our message of recovery. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for today, Joan, and give a little bit of background information on her. Joan is from Western Canada and has been engaged in recovery from anorexia since 1983. She was one of the pioneering members of ABA, that's Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous, in 1993, and her sobriety date is July 13th of 2002. Take it away, Joan. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Justin. My name is Joan, and I'm a chronic anorexic of the hopeless variety. I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning and to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here and speak about ABA, my experience in ABA. And as I say, I welcome those who are new, especially, well, including those who are new in the audience today, in the live audience, and all those who will be listening to this in the future through the podcast. And I'd like to just emphasize that I am not here speaking on behalf of Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous. Nobody can speak on behalf of an organization because we don't have any governing structure. We don't have anyone who governs or can speak for the fellowship as a whole. So I'm here for myself. I can only speak for myself as a member of this fellowship, and I can share my experience with you. And out of that experience has come what strength I have by the grace of God. And out of that comes the hope that I have for the future, and that hopefully you folks will share in to some extent as you listen. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is our primary textbook in Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous. For our first 10 years, we didn't have our own literature. We used the Big Book, and it's still considered our primary textbook. So as a member of ABA, I use this textbook. And it says on page 124 of the Big Book, cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. I've always been struck by that statement and the phrase in it, in God's hands. So my dark past by itself has no power, but in God's hands, my dark past has been and continues to be transformed into a gift, a possession, a precious possession that I can offer to other people, that I can share with others. And some of those people may be able to be relieved of their, path to death and their current misery. That you may find in it the key to life and happiness, or a key. So my story is my greatest possession because my dark past is encapsulated in my story. And so that's what I offer you today, my story. Not my life story, because that wouldn't be very interesting, but my recovery story, the story of my descent into anorexia and my deliverance by a higher power. So my childhood is probably largely irrelevant, except that it left me, I emerged from my childhood with the sense that I had no control over my life. That was a key element in my childhood. The circumstances that gave rise to that are completely unimportant. We all have our own stories, and the details are less important than the end result, because everybody who I have ever met in ABA has emerged from their childhood or from whatever set of circumstances that gave rise to their disease with that feeling of having no control over their life. The other thing that I emerged from childhood with was a very strong sense that I didn't fit in. Starting when I was 7 years old, I didn't fit in anywhere. My descent into anorexia began it began in the fall of 1968. I was 19 years old, and I was in my first year of medical school. For the first time, the first time in my experience, I wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in with this group of 104 fellow students who I would be with for the next 4 years. And I had this need to belong, which I had never felt that before. I'd always taken pride in being somehow above the common herd. And I didn't care that I didn't fit in with my peers. But that switched when I was in my first year of medical school. And I got the brilliant idea that if I went on a diet and lost the 5 or 10 pounds that I had gained over the recent months, that somehow that would allow me to belong better. I would be more acceptable to others. I would be able to fit in to my peer group. That was the motivation for my embracing the diet, which nearly killed me. So I went on a diet, and I was astonishingly successful at it. I restricted my food. I restricted in increasingly bizarre ways. At first, it wasn't odd, but as I progressed, as the weight fell off my body, and as I say, I had 5 or 10 pounds to lose, but I lost far more than 5 or 10 pounds. As I lost weight, I weighed myself once a week, and as I saw that weight drop off my body, I experienced such a feeling of control and power that I had never experienced before. That was the drug to which I became addicted, that feeling of control over my body, which I somehow extrapolated that to, if I'm in control of my body, I'm in control of my life. And it was the most powerful. I too am a multidisciplinary addict, as I'll mention later, but that was definitely, I can still say today, it was the most powerful drug I ever took, was that feeling of control. And I was hooked on it. I couldn't let it go. And as I lost weight, the disease got worse. The natural response to starvation, of course, is to look for food and eat as soon as you can find it. I had an odd thing in my body, the physical allergy, which the Dr. Silkworth talks about in the big book, that when I lost weight and didn't have enough food, I needed to have less food and lose more weight. So that is a unique physical allergy, which normal eaters do not share. And I didn't know that I had a disease. I had no clue for many years that I had a disease. But I did have a mental illness, and that part of it was that physical allergy that I needed to lose more weight. I needed to restrict more foods, and I proceeded to do that. And everything began to revolve around that quest, the relentless pursuit of thinness, as the psychiatric literature talks about it. Everything revolved around it. In the service of restricting my food, I lied, I hid from other people. I developed increasingly bizarre rituals with food, counting calories, measuring my body. Exercise was part of that. And the great irony is that I started out wanting to belong, wanting to fit in, but I ended up belonging only to the disease. Anorexia took me over. It took me captive. And I ended up isolated from everybody, increasingly isolated. I couldn't share my thoughts with anyone because at some level, I mean, I'm not stupid. I knew that they were kind of crazy ideas, but so I was afraid to share them with anybody because I thought they wouldn't understand. And also I thought they might make me stop. And because my primary goal was to continue doing it at ever greater levels, being forced to stop was unthinkable. So anorexia is a very physical, very, very physical disease, as all addiction is, has a huge physical component. The results of starvation are an increased obsession with food. That's a natural biological phenomenon. If you starve an animal, they will do nothing but except search for food. And so everything, my obsession with food, with calories, with what was in food, where I could get food, what food I couldn't eat, what food I could eat, how to get it, how to hide it from other people. It took over my life. And the other aspect of this is malnutrition. Because of the severe restriction that I engaged in, I mean, I ended up losing over 50 pounds of weight by the time I reached my physical crash. It wasn't just, I also had malnutrition, missing vital components from from what I was ingesting, led to deepening insanity. My brain was affected by the malnutrition, the missing vitamins, missing minerals, missing essential nutrients. My insanity got worse. So the perceptual distortion, which is a big part of anorexia, when I looked at my body, I saw fat that I needed to lose, where other people saw an increasingly skeletal frame. I saw a body which needed to be further altered by losing more weight. So that perceptual distortion was contributed to by malnutrition and worsened by malnutrition. The number one symptom of every addiction, I didn't know I was an addict in those days, but the number one symptom of every addiction is something called denial. And denial is an acronym for don't even notice I am lying. I didn't even notice that I was lying to myself. The fear of getting fat took over my life. I continued to say there's nothing wrong with me. When people would express their concern, I brushed them off, or I got angry at them and told them to mind their own business or just walked away. So I got worse and worse. That my weight continued to fall off. Perceptual distortion increased. My thinking became increasingly out of touch with reality. I went through medical school in that state, and I achieved my goal. I wanted to succeed. I didn't want to just be thin. I wanted to be the best student in the class. I wanted to have the top marks. And I did manage to accomplish that for the last 3 years of medical school. So I graduated in 1972 with the top marks in the class, which goes to show that you don't need to have you don't need to be in touch with reality to succeed in medical school. The thing is, I could bracket my anorexia to some extent. And anorexia gave me an ability to have a laser-like focus on something. I excluded everything from my concentration that was not associated with either controlling my food or getting the top marks in the class. So I was able to study and retain enough information to pass the exams, to impress my tutors, etc., even though I was very, very thin. After I graduated, I went away from home. I went to Dalhousie and in Eastern Canada, Atlantic Canada, to do family practice residency program. And I stayed there for only 1 year because at the end of that first year, I was abruptly forced to admit to myself that I was anorexic. That was because I could no longer climb a flight of stairs. And because I didn't have any quadriceps muscles in my legs, they were gone. All my muscles had wasted away. And I couldn't climb the stairs any longer. And I had the grace of this awakening to the truth that I am anorexic and that I was going to die if I didn't do something different. So I returned to Western Canada, and I started working in Western Canada in Edmonton on my second year of my residency. And it was during that year that I reached a physical crash. I couldn't function any longer, and I was hospitalized for 2 months. And in hospital, I got the standard treatment of the day, which was nutritional. I had to eat the food they gave me. I had to gain weight, but I kept my drug by bargaining with the dietitian about what I would eat and how I would gain that weight. I'd promised the doctor that I would gain the weight, so I did. But as I say, I bargained with the dietitian. So I retained some measure of feeling in control of my food and gaining the weight that I had to gain in order to be in the hospital in the way that I wanted to gain it. So self-will run riot continued. And I was not sober in the hospital, even though I gained 20 pounds back. So I'll come back to that term of sober in a moment. So I did gain 20 pounds back, and then I made a bargain with my disease that I would do what it said, provided it let me keep that weight on. And I then proceeded to work as in the medical field as a physician. And I got married at the end of 1974. That was my way to escape from anorexia. Without ever telling him that I was anorexic, I married him thinking he would be my salvation. And of course, he wasn't. The marriage lasted for 3.5 years. He couldn't stand it anymore. And I couldn't bear to keep pulling him down because I was still married to anorexia first. My first allegiance was to anorexia. I altered my eating practices enough that I kept that 20 pounds on my body. but I'd lost over 50. So I still wasn't at a healthy weight. We separated in 1978. I went on working as a family physician in Edmonton. In 1983, I hit my bottom. And this was a great gift from my higher power. It was my first bottom. I couldn't work any longer. I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't look at another person in the eye and pretend that everything was okay any longer. Because by this time I knew I was anorexic, but I had struck this unholy bargain with the disease to keep following its rules, provided that I could keep the weight up. And so I reached the place, I was just about 34 years old, where I was going to either commit suicide or I was going to ask for help. And I didn't really know what to ask for, but I remember at that time the thought coming to me that I needed to surrender. I remember that word coming into my mind, surrender. I have to surrender. I knew that I was hanging on to anorexia, and I thought I wanted to hang on to it. I thought I was choosing to hang on to anorexia. That was the greatest lie I told myself, was that I was anorexic by choice at this point, because it was the surest way to stay thin. The obsession with my weight hadn't abated at all, even though I had gained that 20 pounds back. So I knew I needed to surrender, but I didn't know what I needed to surrender. And how I was going to surrender, because I couldn't feed myself any differently than the rules of anorexia allowed me to feed myself. So I prayed. I reached out to an unknown higher power. I asked for help. And the answer to my prayer came in the form of some people who showed up in my life who invited me to eat with them. And they didn't know I was anorexic, and I didn't tell them I was anorexic, but they invited me to eat with them, and they prepared the food, and I didn't have any choice or hand in the preparation of the food. We call that receiving meal support. And when I received that meal support, I was sober. I sat at their table and ate their food without altering it, without bargaining with them, without any choice over my food. And I had no control over my food anymore, over when I ate with them. Feeling like I was in control was such a joke anyway, because I'd never been in control. It was the disease that was in control of what I was eating. But the disease told me I was in control. The scale proved that. The small size clothes I could fit into proved that, et cetera, et cetera. So I ate their food, I got sober, and then I was able, without ever hearing about the 12 steps at that time, to move through a process, an intuitive process, similar to what Bill W. did and the early members of AA did. They didn't have the steps written down. I'd never read the 12 steps, but I moved through this process of self-examination, inventory, and then becoming entirely ready to have this God that I had reached out to remove this obsession from me. I was entirely ready to face life without the obsession of anorexia, which was my greatest character defect, of course, was this obsession, this fear of getting fat. To have that removed was terrifying, but I was willing to have it removed because I didn't have a life that was worth living any longer. So I became entirely ready, and then I humbly asked God to remove this obsession, and God removed the obsession. Now, my experience of the higher power is that when God's got his back to the wall and there's no other way, he does something dramatic. He did that with Bill W. in the hospital in December of 1934. And he did that with me on February the 24th, 1983. I was restored to sanity. The obsession with my weight was cast from my mind in the twinkling of an eye. It was like coming out of a bad dream or being snapped out of a hypnotic trance that I'd been walking in for 15 years. Yeah, almost 15 years. And I woke up. It's like, and I looked back at those years and I thought, how is that possible? I knew I wasn't fat. I knew I'd never been fat. I thought, how did I lose 15 years of my life to the idea that I was fat? I was restored to sanity. The obsession was removed. Now, God did that for me because there was no other way. I didn't have a support system. I'd never read about the 12 steps. I didn't have a sponsor. And I'd been willing to get sober without knowing that that was the key to the whole thing. It's like I had to get sober first. Then I was given this incredible gift of the removal of my obsession. So I knew then that I had been ill. I knew I hadn't done it by choice. And that was the beginning of my recovery. That was not the end of my recovery, because 3 months later, I started drinking. I became an alcoholic. So for another 10 years, I wandered around alcoholism, workaholism, relationship addiction, codependency. I just was still, because I hadn't been well enough yet. I didn't have any support system in 1983. I had no sponsor. I didn't have the steps. I didn't know about continuing to take inventory. I didn't know any of that. But the obsession was largely still absent, although I did use little bits of it. In 1994, I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober in 95. I got a sponsor immediately when I got into AA. I walked through those steps, and the rest is history. I've been doing that ever since. I had my last relapse in anorexia in July of 2002. And since then, I have been continuously sober, meaning that I surrender all control of my food, exercise, body weight, and body shape to a higher power. Because the drug, as I said, is the feeling of being in control. That's the one thing that distinguishes Anorexics and Bulimics Anonymous from all other eating disorder fellowships, is our definition of the drug and our definition of sobriety. I will say it again. The drug is the feeling of being in control over food, weight, shape, etc. And sobriety is to surrender that control, all control over my food, weight, body shape, and my exercise, to a power greater than myself, working through other human beings. So we can't recover in isolation. God, there's a section in our textbook which says, is God going to come and cook your breakfast for you? No, but a human being may come and cook your breakfast for you. And your higher power will work through that person or another person. It doesn't have to be that person. It can be anybody. But it needs to be somebody who is sane, who knows how to feed you. And to be sober is to surrender and receive that food and gain the weight that you need and become the shape that God intended you to be. I believe that 12-step, I'll just finish with this. 12-step recovery works for two reasons. And as far as I'm concerned, there are two reasons why it works. The first is that we understand one another. We identify with one another. That doesn't mean I relate to what you say. It means that I see myself in you. I hear myself in you. I identify. We are one and the same. And we speak the same language. I hear myself in you. I see myself in you. To anybody outside the fellowship, it sounds like we're speaking in tongues, because they don't understand our language. That gives such a sense of shared community, the deep acceptance of one another, because we see and hear ourselves in one another. So that's the first reason. The second reason that 12-step recovery works, this is my opinion, of which I have many. I believe this. The second reason it works is because everyone gets to choose their own conception of a power greater than themselves. They don't only get to do that, they have the sacred responsibility to do that. Unless we seek a higher power, we're not going to be able to find a solution for our problem. Our problem is powerlessness. The solution is to get some power. Obviously, it has to be a power greater than ourselves. And it's our responsibility to get to that higher power, that greater power. And the way to do that, my sponsor taught me, is through the 12-step program. Through moving through those steps, I will come into relationship with that greater power who will solve my problem. The big book doesn't say it will help us solve our problem. It says it will solve our problem being powerlessness. So with that, I will conclude. I'm very grateful to have, obviously I've abbreviated what it's like now, but I was one of the founding members of ABA. There were 3 of us in 93, right around the same time I got to AA. We wrote a textbook in 2002. A group of us got together, and it's in its 2nd edition now. If you don't have this book and you're interested, I'd encourage you to get it through the ABA website, which is ABA12, spelled 1-2, ABA12steps.org. You can order the book through the website. Please order it through the website rather than from Amazon, because a lot of criminals have taken the text of the book and are publishing it themselves in order to profit from it. So we don't profit from it. So I encourage people, if they want, or if you're interested, do get the book through the website. That's all. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Joan. And I will make sure that we have the link to the websites where they can get that book in the show notes of the podcast, and make sure that we have a link to everything that you do there with that is done there at that fellowship, so that they can come check it out if this is something that appeals to them. Judy, I really appreciate you sharing your experience, strength, and hope on this. We do have a couple of questions that have come in from the live audience. I've written several here, and if anybody else in the live audience has a question for Joan, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we will get to those. First question that comes in is from Ellen. Ellen says, can you please repeat the acronym for denial? What acronym did you use for that?
Don't even notice I am lying. Don't even notice I am lying. So in other words, at an internal level, I don't know that I'm lying. So I don't feel any guilt about telling bald-faced lies because I don't know that I'm lying. I didn't notice that I'm lying. I'm so convinced by the disease of the truth of my false beliefs that I lie without knowing about it. I mean, there were lies I told that I knew about. I already had breakfast. I don't like potatoes. But about the fact that I was sick and that I was under the control of some illness, that mental illness that had taken over my mind, I didn't know I was sick. I thought I was doing it by choice. And that is what constitutes denial.
Yeah, and I want to dig there for just a minute, because one of the questions I wrote down goes along with that, because you said that, the drug in ABA is defined as the feeling of being in control of whatever choices, not choices, but what your weight, your body, your whatever, all of those things that you listed there. I'm in control of this. That's the drug. And that talks of power. And yet we see in addiction, we're powerless. Can you talk a little bit more about that dichotomy between the control, the power I feel in the drug versus the reality of the powerlessness and where I need to seek power outside of myself?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I don't see much difference between us and between anorexia and alcoholism, in the sense that when an alcoholic drinks, as an alcoholic, when I drank, I had a tremendous feeling of control over my life. I felt powerful. I felt I could do things that I couldn't do before I had taken the booze. So, I mean, it's a little different, but it's still that same sense of I'm in control. Whereas a non-alcoholic, when they drink, has a tipsy, out of control feeling. The alcoholic, when they drink, feels in control of their life. And so for an anorexic, I felt in control of my food and my weight. But sometimes people don't feel in control of their weight, especially if they slip into bulimia, into binging, which is bulimia. Binging followed by purging is bulimia. I haven't talked about that. But they feel out of control of their food and their weight when they're binging. But as soon as they purge, they feel in control again. They may not in reality be in control. They may in fact gain weight because of the purging, or because of the binging, but they feel in control when they purge. So it's a powerful internal sense that nobody can take this away from me. This is mine. I can do this. I can get rid of this food. I can eat this food. I can get rid of this food. It's just it's a feeling. It's not congruent with reality, in the same way that a falling down drunk is not in control of their life. It has no reality in it, but the alcoholic feels in control when they drink, in control of something, in control of life, in control of their fate, in control of what they're going to be able to accomplish, their relationships, whatever. There's a feeling of being in control that comes with that. Does that answer your question? But
yeah, I think so.
The truth is that we're completely powerless over it, because the thing takes us over because of the physical allergy that ensures that I continue to drink or continue to starve. I am under the thumb of the disease itself. It is truly a mental disorder which takes possession of us. You know, in ancient times, they thought people were possessed by devils. Well, we know people aren't possessed by devils, but I do know that I felt like I was possessed by something as an anorexic. I was possessed by this mental illness, which assured me that I was in control if I did what it said.
Yeah, that reminds me of, well, one of the things you said early on in this is you said you wanted to belong, but ended up belonging only to the disease. You know, there's a song by the Police back in the 80s that talked about, you know, hey, I'll be wrapped around your finger, and soon enough I realize that I'm wrapped around the disease's finger. The disease owns me. And I think that's a really powerful concept for me to grasp in my own walking in my recovery, something that was very vital to recognize. Nope, I'm not in control. I am now a slave to my disease. I have no control over it. Yeah. No matter how much I think. And you mentioned a little bit about the bulimic, and that's one of the questions that came in from the live audience. Is this approach valuable for the bulimic also?
Yes, provided that they can identify with what they read in the book. The book talks extensively about bulimia, about anorexia. It even talks about compulsive eating. But bulimics fit very well in ABA because they can identify with that need to be thin, the fear of getting fat. Oh, look at all this food I've just eaten, which is, of course, binging is a natural consequence of starving. So most anorexics don't remain pure restrictive anorexics. I'm in a minority in ABA. Most anorexics do move on to binging and purging, just because, and the purging is because they have to still feel in control of their weight. So they can if you can identify with that need to be in control of your weight, then you will fit into ABA. Even if you purge, because purging is simply the natural outcome binging is the natural outcome of starving. Purging is the need to get rid of the food, which is going to make me fat if I keep it in my body. If the bulimic wasn't afraid of getting fat, they would have no need to purge.
Yeah,
Does that,
thank you. Yeah, that does. That answers my question. Thank you for that. And just as a heads up to all of our live attendees, I've gotten a lot of questions here, and I'll get to as many as we can in the next, 15 minutes or so. But if we don't get to all of your questions, don't be offended. I'll post your questions in our WhatsApp chat here at the end, so anybody can get in there and ask those questions or answer those questions that they would like. Okay, next question from our live audience. Actually, I'm going to do this one because it follows up on what you said. This is from Martin. Is this not what the book means when it says we are under an illusion of control? The disease lies to us. Do you have any thoughts on that?
yeah, of course it's an illusion of control. Although when I stepped on the scale and my weight had dropped, in reality, I felt in control. But what I was missing was the fact that I couldn't have done otherwise. I couldn't gain the weight, even if I wanted to. I wanted to. At various points, I wanted to gain some weight. I wanted to stop. I've abbreviated my story tremendously. But there were times where I actually wanted to gain weight. And I couldn't. I was afraid to put the food in. I mean, the fear had taken over to such an extent, I couldn't put the food in my mouth. So what kind of control is that? It was an illusion. Even though the scale said I had lost weight, I wasn't in control. The disease itself was in control.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's it's very visceral, the way that you share this perception of thinking I'm in control but not. And I think it's very helpful to people who may be addicts to other things, may not struggle with anorexia or bulimia, but that vision, that perception of thinking I'm in control but really not being, I think, is very powerful for everybody. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, next question I'm going to ask. This comes from Judy. Judy says, it sounds like you have transferred in and out of various addictive behaviors. What are your thoughts about perhaps finding a 12-step group for all types rather than treating one addiction at a time? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I thank you for asking that question, because as addicts, we can identify with one another. I can identify. My brother was a gambler. Gambling is total anathema to an anorexia, okay? My brother died of alcoholism and his gambling addiction when he was 73 years old. And I could identify with his powerlessness, but I couldn't identify with gambling. That made no sense to me at all. I thought, are you stupid? Don't you know that you can't win? So it's like I couldn't understand him. So yes, I could understand powerlessness, but in order to form the community within a distinct fellowship, we have to be able to identify with one another. That's why I said that's the reason 12-step recovery works, is because of that unique identification. I can see myself in every detail in this other person. I can hear myself in every detail in how they share. So it isn't possible to have a generic, no-name brand 12-step recovery. That's my opinion, because we don't have a way to identify with one another at the level that we need to get us into the room. People come because they hear themselves, they see themselves, and so they get into the room in that way. Once you get to a certain stage of recovery, you realize that, well, yeah, powerlessness is powerlessness. So everybody shares it. It's over something different. You're powerless over cocaine. I'm powerless over my insane eating practices. But some people may say I'm powerless over food. But we can't. People who are I'll just say this quickly. People who are powerless over food don't fit into ABA very well. I have never seen a pure compulsive eater recover. Somebody who hasn't switched back and forth between anorexia and compulsive eating. I've never seen anyone of that ilk actually recover in ABA. But that's okay, because there are wonderful fellowships for people who are compulsive overeaters, who are allergic to food, who are addicted to food. I was never addicted to food. I was addicted to the insane eating practices that led me to feel in control of my weight. That's what I was addicted to.
I think that's really powerful. I was actually going to ask about that. Why is this different than like other food fellowships? And you answered that very well. Thank you for that, Joan. Um, a question that comes in from the live audience here from Catherine. How did you start eating again if you were powerless over your eating disorder? How did you go about that process?
I was given the gift of desperation. I'd hit a bottom. I lived near the high level bridge in Edmonton. I was going to go off that bridge because I couldn't live my life anymore. I lost my ability to work. That was the crowning blow that brought me to my bottom. I couldn't work any longer as a physician. So I'm sitting in my apartment in the middle of winter thinking about suicide. And I was so desperate to have I wanted my life to change. I didn't actually want to die. I just wanted the pain to end. And the only way the pain was going to end was if this obsession was removed from me. And so I got on my knees and I begged God. I said, help me. I didn't know what I was asking for, but I said, help. Instead of committing suicide, I prayed. And I've heard many stories like that in AA of people who prayed instead of killing themselves. And they were given the help that they needed. The help that I needed came 2 months later in the form of those people who invited me to eat with them. And I went and I ate with them because I liked them. I liked being with them. They were a group of people in a religious community who devoted themselves to a soup kitchen in the inner city and the care of the poor. They lived in community and they fed the poor and they clothed the poor. And I loved being with them because when I was in their company, I could feel the warmth come from them and the light in their eyes. And I knew they were vibrantly alive because they were committed to a higher power. They had dedicated their lives to a higher power. I liked that and I wanted that somehow for myself. And so when they said, come for lunch, I said, okay. And that was grace. That was pure grace. That word popped out of my mouth. I didn't want to go and eat lunch, but I wanted to be with them. And so the price tag was I was going to have to eat lunch if I wanted to be with them because I said I would eat lunch and I wasn't going to go back on my word. So I went and ate lunch. I surrendered. And that was all that was necessary. God took care of the rest. And that was grace. That was pure gift from my higher power. I didn't get myself sober. My higher power got me sober by luring me into their company and awakening something in my heart that I wanted desperately for myself. And the price tag was to go and eat with them. And I didn't know that I was getting sober when I got sober. But today, of course, in ABA, people know that this is the route to getting sober, is to receive that meal support. And very few people have dramatic spiritual experiences like I had or Bill W. had. Some of us do. But I can tell you, as I told you from my story, that dramatic spiritual experience didn't last. On my own, 3 months later, I started drinking. So we need community. We need a community for the higher power to work through. So
beautiful.
I'm veered off the topic of the question, but
no, beautiful. I love how you went through that and talked through that. It's just beautiful and powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to the previous question because I hadn't a thought as you were sharing there about that previous question about the specific 12-step groups or a universal 12-step group. And the way you explained it, all of a sudden I had this thought of, maybe AA or ABA or, whatever anonymous is like Recovery 101. Because you mentioned, hey, after several years, I suddenly start realizing that powerlessness is powerlessness, that I need to find a power. And maybe when I'm first starting out, I am not in a place where I can do that. I got to go through 101 before I go to the graduate level courses, And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the key element is sobriety. The key for me getting well, for recovery, was to get sober. I had to get sober. So an anorexic and bulimic needs to be in a room where they are shown and told, and the testimony comes about what sobriety is and how to get sober. So if I were to go into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I might be able to identify with the powerlessness that I hear, but they're not going to tell me how they got sober in their eating. So it's the same thing with, and I think any fellowship, we need to be sober in order to recover, and that's the first requirement. There is no recovery without sobriety. And if we do get sober and we are willing to walk through a spiritual path like the 12 steps or something like it, 12 steps or 16 or 29, who cares? If you're willing to stay sober and walk through a spiritual path with a human guide, a sponsor, then you will recover. There's no other possible outcome to walking through those steps, those 12 steps, other than a spiritual awakening. It's the spiritual awakening described in step 12, or named in step 12, rather.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
No, beautiful. And that concept of there is no recovery without sobriety is a difficult one for a lot of people who have a process disease like an eating disorder or an eating disorder, a food addiction, a sex addiction, something like that. They think, no, I can go recover and just have little slips here and there. My experience is I need to have sobriety in order to experience recovery. So thank you for sharing that. I've got a few more questions here. We'll get to as many as we can. Next one is from an anonymous attendee. Could you speak to the roles of sponsor and meal support provider in ABA?
Well, yes, I have a sponsor and I had a meal support provider. In the many years that I've been in the process of recovery, I've provided meal support for other people who've come and lived with me in my home for periods of time, or stayed with, for varying periods of time. The longest is probably about 2 months. And I have provided that meal support. I always have to be guided by a dietitian because I'm not a dietitian, even though I am a physician. And each person's nutritional needs are different. They're starting out at a different weight. They may have different allergies to food or gluten enteropathy or something, diabetes, who knows, some medical condition that requires their food to be unique to them. And that would be guided by a registered dietitian, knowledgeable about eating disorders. So everybody, who I have sponsored needs to get their meal support somehow. As a sponsor, I do not provide meal support to the people that I sponsor. Now, some sponsors do, but I never have, because blurring that role, the thing is, when I provide meal support, sometimes I end up with the person receiving the food I remember one young woman from Quebec wanting to throw the food at me that I had put in front of her. She was, a young anorexic, and she just was absolutely disgusted with this food on her plate. And she wanted to hurl the plate at me. She was so angry at me. You can't mix the role of meal support provider with sponsor, because the sponsor needs to be somebody who's there to hold the hand of the anorexic while she gets sober. She wouldn't have taken my hand. She wanted to kill me. So the roles are different. And so I've always kept them separate. Some people don't, as I say, but meal support provider guided by a registered dietitian so that the person is getting the food they need in the quantities they need to gain the weight they need. That is essential for sobriety. That's what sobriety is to receive that, to surrender and receive that.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. So I've got a few more questions. I'm just going to ask one more from the audience and one more close-up question with you before we close down here. There are a couple more. I'll post them in the WhatsApp group for anybody who wants to get in there and check those out. But this next question I think is important for you to address from a 12-step perspective. This is from someone who has a loved one who was recently diagnosed with anorexia in their household. Should we get rid of our scales in the house? What are your thoughts on that, Joan?
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, you know what? I honestly, without knowing the circumstances, the age of the person who's involved, ABA is not appropriate for children because and there are strong warnings in the book about minors with eating disorders not attempting to use this approach because it does require a certain amount of maturity to be able to take responsibility for the surrender that is necessary to get sober. So I don't know if this is a child in your house, if she's locked into anorexia or he's locked into anorexia and you throw out your scale, they'll probably find a way to get one. We all know the determination that we have as addicts to get what we need to support our drug, to find our drug. On the other hand, there's no point in leaving the scale out, in inviting the child to weigh themselves every day. It didn't help. I mean, I weighed myself. I saw the pounds dropping off. I felt powerful. It just reinforced the disease. So I don't know. I can't tell you what to do. Just for one moment, I'm going to come back to the previous question. I realize it didn't answer the question about sponsorship. My experience is that my sponsors have always been there to guide me through the 12-step program. That's their main role, is to guide me through, to show me the way through. It's a minefield. It's a jungle. It's we need a guide to go through those steps. And that's the role of the sponsor. But you can't do the steps if you're not sober. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joan. Okay, so before we wrap up, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
Just that if you're suffering with an eating disorder, there is hope. There's also help for families through a fellowship called Ab-Anon, which is similar to Al-Anon for Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's for the families and friends of people with eating disorders. And I don't know their website, but I'm sure you can find it. There is help available for you also. Yeah. And just to remember that there is hope. Where there is breath, there is hope. Where there is life, there is hope. And that asking for help is key. When we ask for help, we open the door to grace from that higher power, the higher power who works by grace, who will provide that grace to you to move to the next stage of whatever that's going to look like. But keep asking for help. And wherever you can tell the truth, tell the truth. Even if you're not actually telling truth, that it's truth, that it may be a lie that you're telling that you think is the truth. Still just put it out, say it out loud. That's called being honest. If I'm being honest, I'm opening my mouth and telling the truth to another human being, the truth that is going on inside my head, even if it's a lie. And I don't know it's a lie.
Oh, thank you so much, Joan, for a fantastic RECO12 weekly speaker meeting. Like I said, if we missed your questions, I will post any missed questions in our WhatsApp group. If you want to join the WhatsApp group community, I put instructions in the chat here, also in the show notes of the meeting. If you want to join in there from the podcast, please come follow us. Next week, we have a great speaker, another new speaker to us for RECO12. It will be Dr. Judy Hollis, whose topic is cross addictions and transferring obsessions. I think that'll be a good one to follow up with this meeting with. I'm excited to hear from her. She's been on our calendar for a long time and grateful to get her speaking. On that note, I'm booking guest speakers for the months of April and May right now. So if anybody out there in the live audience is like, I have a message that I'd like to share. If you have solid recovery and are working your steps, please reach out to me. You can get a hold of me at RECO12pod@gmail.com. That's RECO12pod@gmail.com. We can get you booked here in the next few months to be a speaker. And man, we're just excited for what we've got going here in the world. There's good stuff happening. Recovery is happening. I love this message of hope that Joan left us off with. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer. Joan, are you willing to say that for us?
You bet. Let's use the we version. I invite everyone to join me. God, Grant us the
God,
serenity
grant us the serenity
to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you so much, Joan. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is our higher power, your higher power, as you conceive your higher power. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.